Well, hi everybody. Uh, Today is an anniversary of sorts, and I just happened to notice it online. I knew it was around this time. I wasn't sure of the exact date, if it was the 16th, the 17th. I wanted to say 18th. But it's 40 years ago today that ex-Beatle Paul McCartney was arrested in Japan for possession of half a pound of marijuana. And this made me think that maybe I would go into a closet that's not here but in the living room closet, and dig out a box that's buried way in the back. And I know it has original newspapers of certain Beatles related events that I used to collect back then. And I thought, well, what do you have this stuff for? Nobody's really looking at it unless you just pull it out once every 10 years or something. Well, this is an opportunity to make use of it. I know that I bought the newspaper the morning after the pot bust, because I was going to school, and I have a very vivid memory of walking to school on a pretty bright morning, if I can recall, and hearing the news, Paul McCartney busted. And the first thing that I thought was, Paul, you don't usually hear things like that. You were used to things like that with John and George and maybe even Ringo to an extent, but not always so used to hearing Paul in trouble like that. And it was just an odd thing. Wow, how serious is this? What's going to happen? He was in Japan with Wings to do a tour, and the dates were canceled. And I have the newspaper. This is the original newspaper that I took 40 years ago. I actually bought this. Of course, memory sometimes is not what you as you remember it. I remembered it saying Paul pegged for pot, but that's on the bottom, as you can see on the bottom of this picture. Paul pegged for pot. And I didn't remember that Mayor Koch from New York was on the top. But yeah, this is it. And 25 cents. The paper's dated Thursday, January the 17th, 1980. John was still with us at the time. And, speaking of John, there's stories that John was got a kind of a chuckle out of this at the time. That's something that you kind of could imagine John doing. I mean, he couldn't, he couldn't help note the irony, I guess, and stuff of his former bandmate. Then there were rumors, and how true these are, I don't know. I know Yoko haters like to tell a story that supposedly, this is all from the gossip ranks, that because Yoko's Japanese, supposedly Paul and Linda had visited the Lennons at one point and said that they had scored some really good pot or something like that. And then Yoko called the Japanese authorities and had him arrested and something like that. I don't believe that. Don't know if that's ever been substantiated or not, but it sure makes good, Yoko hate gossip. But I don't know. But it is what it is, or was what it was. And I know Paul has been on record saying, years after that, he had heard that the fear that he had was that the penalty was very hard and harsh in Japan, and that it could be, I don't know if it's 9 years or so hard labor. He was thinking he was facing possible 9 years hard labor. And I think I remember stories that Paul was actually playing his guitar for the people in the prison and stuff like that. And I think he stayed there. I don't know if it was 10 days, 9 days, something like that. He stayed in there. And he said at the time that was the longest time that he and his wife Linda had been apart since they were married at the time. Now, another thing that I'll show you is this record, which is an unofficial record. It's called McCartney and Wings Live in Tokyo. And you can see it's got the Asian writing there on the side. This is the tour that never came to be. The question is this what really broke Wings up? Was this the last nail in the coffin of Wings? There's been different talks about that. I don't even know if Paul really said as much. I think he was wanting maybe to disband it anyway, but this was it. And Paul never went back to Japan until 1990, I think. I know the 89-90 tour when he came out again to perform publicly, I know that he wound up playing Japan. I have a copy of that performance. Very good, professionally shot performance, which is good. On the back of this record, this is not, by the way, I should mention this. This is not Tokyo, Japan concert. It's not it's not true. But I think they're playing on the hype. But the back of this had a picture of Paul, thumbs up with the handcuffs on, looking pretty positive. I gotta say, to Paul's credit, I mean, he handled it very well. I think he kind of looked amused at the whole thing, and even he was probably afraid, because he was afraid of the hard labor penalty that he thought was going to be imposed, but and the years of imprisonment. But he kind of like played it off, looking like kind of like amused and nodding and saying hello in the typical thumbs up Paul way, which I think was a good way to handle it. And later on, he said, I don't know if I don't know if it was later on or it was actually at the time, but shortly thereafter, he said how he still believes in his mind, and a lot of people, believe this too, that marijuana is a lot less harmful than he said stuff like I can't remember everything. I know he said rum punch, maybe alcohol, and he said and glue. He said all of which are perfectly legal. And he stands by that, or stood by that. Anyway, that's just a little something I did for this dubious anniversary. 1980 started out poorly, and as we all know, it ended poorly. 1980, not the best of years for the Beatles. Well, anyway, thanks for watching, everybody. I'm glad Paul made it out free.